other questions?
Okay, so I want to reiterate that those are three very excellent presentations, and thank you for those. I could ask all of you individually questions, but since we have limited time, I think I just want to speak to what I think is something that people have been talking around and actually links all of the presentations today together, which is this issue of capital flight and capital control, and kind of more generally, control over investment. And I think we started out this morning with Ed, who's now not here to defend himself, but talking about, a basic social democratic principle being, kind of an understanding that there should be a private ownership of the means of production. And Corey, I think very rightly, identified the ways in which that means that, admitting that there's certain limits to democracy in terms of a workplace. But the other side of it is that we basically accept, if we accept private ownership of the means of production, private control over investment. And that means that we do have to keep chasing that investment. And to John's point, I think it's a very interesting one, which is to say, why is it that the company gets to decide to make hybrid cars? Why don't we have a say in that? And I think that's a really big question that I don't know how to get to that point, but I think it is one that should be on the table, which is, do we think that we can have a just and democratic society without democratic control over investment? So not really a question, but if you want to comment on it, I'd be happy to hear what other people think.
And while you pass the mic, another way to rephrase or to look at it is, to what extent can we succeed when we work within the logic of competition, global competition, and accept that logic? And how do we come up against boundaries very quickly once we just operate within that box?
I mean, it's a really complicated question that I think I should write a book next week to answer your question.
Yes.
But I mean, just from an historical point of view, there was some experiment. I think we should look back at those experiments. I think the Swedish wage earners fund were one example where, I don't know if you're familiar with this, it was a Maynard plan in the 70s that they were saying there was too much profit of certain companies, so they were taxing the over profit and transferring this to wage earner funds and then buying back stock. So it was a progressive way of socializing capital and also corporation, and also equalizing difference in wages. But also union, I think, should talk about full employment strategies and how can we secure transition between different type of employment situations. So that will be my three little solutions for today.
I'm not sure. I would think I think that's not, from the parts of the industry that I've seen, that's a long way away. So.
Yeah, I'm also all the way for the socialization of the means of production, but I also think there is a strategic problem. We are in the middle of a catastrophic defeat of working classes all over the world. So I think that we need to think through because this is a very good idea, but I don't see anything not going in the direction of the socialization of the means of production, not even going in the direction of any kind of regulation or any kind of limits to like capital mobility or market decision of like market-led societies.
Can we pose the last question that we wanted to put to everyone? What are next steps? What can we do? These are complex questions, but what are some next steps that we can take?
And maybe I can piggyback onto that with reference to some of what Bruce said, although this has bearing elsewhere as we think about a post-Janus worker mobilization and Trump, etc. But to what extent will the Latin American, Argentinian, and even global left learn from what happened in Brazil? Because one of the arguments that someone like Alfredo Setiello makes is that the PT's failure in the current election has a lot to do with its inability to maintain the unorganized workers within their political coalition. And it strikes me as very similar to what's happening in Argentina, as you described. So, and it's kind of like the question, to what extent can the seemingly terminal crisis of the left right now inspire radical change and mobilization? But is there an opportunity for the Latin American left, the Argentinian left, to learn from what's happening and to pursue strategies of solidarity in light of that? And do you see that happening based on some of the work you've done? Or are we just going to go further down this path towards, at the best, authoritarian neoliberalism, at the worst, fascism?
I was just thinking in response to that, maybe something, one of the things that little pieces of it, that Ed Broadbent was sharing this morning was about the importance of values and trying to have some leadership. And I was thinking that in terms of things feeling worse and worse, one of the responses or strategies of the some of the Indian trade unionists who are trying to face the challenge of how do you unionize a primarily youthful labor force, many of whom are especially the women, are for the first time in the labor market, they're coming out of non-employment, and so they're pretty excited about having a job and being able to get out of their parents' house at all. And they don't see their long-term future in that industry, which does make it hard to unionize. And so one of the responses has been to try to think about youth-oriented labor drives. And so one of the effective ways to, what are the young people really, what do they want? Well, they want Western material goods. They want iPhones and Nike running shoes and all those, so the campaigns, so basically they're copying the same strategy that's being used in the call center pools to drive them on and take a few more calls and keep being polite when you'd rather be rude, is to copy those incentives that are dangling over, like, if you make however many more calls, then we'll give you we'll put your name in a draw and you'll win something. And so they're basically copying, in a sense, the value structure and the material, so it's not a positive thing. But how do you shift the values off the capitalist goods and the toys? And who cares about the environment if you have a brand new iPhone X?
Yeah, but they can't afford that anymore. Things are getting so bad.
But they can get a lottery ticket and they might win one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so you were going to say something.
I'm not particularly optimistic about the immediate prospects of the Latin American left. I think that what Latin American progressive governments lost the support. I don't know, I would disagree with the idea that they lost the support of these poorest sections of the working class. They lost the support of formal workers, and they lost the support of middle classes precisely because of their massive social assistance programs, which I think there are a number of things that we don't understand, and there are a number of things that we need to figure out, right? This conservative term and this super frightening conservative, we don't really know how to communicate. We don't know how to intervene in this very conservative climate, because we keep repeating that this is wrong and people don't care. It is not Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president-elect, has been very open about how reactionary, and race is not in the Canadian or even the US sense of being racist. He has been saying very openly that the black people in Brazil have to be killed. that the problem with the Brazilian dictatorship was that it didn't kill enough people. So this is not that people are confused, people are openly supporting this type of change. So yeah, we need to think.
That is crazy. Yes, comment?
Yeah, good point, Jordan, but World War II, when you got a guy like Henry Ford that has enough pull to tell the U.S. military, don't bomb my plants over Europe, we're in for a tough fight, okay? You know what I mean? The security of the free world is threatened with Nazi Germany invading other countries, and we got a capitalist like Henry Ford is worried about his plant being bombed, and not because the workers are going to get killed, because he's going to lose some money. I think it's on page 215, I could be wrong, of Victor Reuther's book. You know, they converted the auto industry into the defense industry. And then General Motors basically, like with taxpayers' money, the capitalists of General Motors, they wanted the U.S. government to donate those plants so they could start making more money, right? So, you know, the threat of a world security, and these guys are still trying to make money off the taxpayers. We are in for a tough fight with that.
Last week, on Saturday, I was at the annual general labor meeting for the city of Kawartha Lakes, where we live. And we were sitting down having a similar conversation, and because we have a really rough time in some of our rural areas. And what needs to happen is mediated support to redefine what we count as work. Like Marilyn Waring says, like, who's counting? What counts? And so that it becomes a much more inclusive idea around work, so that maybe labor movements among, you had mentioned, unemployed, maybe disabled, community support workers, those kind of things, volunteers, can find some way to come together and raise their voice and be supported by media, so that the messaging, like Dr. Broadbent was saying earlier, so the message we start hearing is for the working class, for the working people, and working means this, not just this.
It's this really good paper of Ofe Wiesenthal, that were two sociologists in Germany that were seeing the problem. Yeah. Classic paper is the problem of the working class organization is they have to define their own interests. Mm-hmm. Capitalists don't have to define their own interests, they're just acting.
Exactly.
So we have to, it's complicated, but we have to take back the ideological debate. Yes. Trump was really strong because he talked to those guys, the working class, and he was able to kind of bring back a new ideology. So I think we should, like what we do today is good for defining our own interests, but there's much more work to be done.
And another point that same paper makes is the challenge is to maintain consistently worker patterns of resistance in the face of a structural system of power which will continuously produce domination and oppression. And so at the moment workers stop resisting is the very moment that system of domination will continue to exert itself in that space that's been established.